Hey there, survivors. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from. Now let's begin our journey into the unknown. The helicopter's rotors carved through Maine's morning mist as I pressed my face against the cold window, watching the coastal town of Lansford materialized below us. From 300 ft up, I could already see something was catastrophically wrong. Abandoned cars scattered across Route 1 in chaotic patterns, their doors hanging open as if people had fled mid-drive. Dark stains marked the asphalt between vehicles, stains too large and numerous to be oil spills. 2 minutes to drop zone. Our pilot's voice crackled through my headset. I adjusted my rifle and glanced at my team. Captain Hannah Rogers sat rigid in her harness, her fingers drumming against her M4's stock in that nervous pattern I'd recognized over our 8 years serving together. Across from me, Corporal Jack Wolf, barely 22 and still believing the system never lied, checked his communication equipment with the methodical precision of someone trying to stay calm. "Listen up," Rogers' voice cut through the engine noise. "We're here for Dr. Marina Fleury. Intelligence indicates she's trapped in Lansford General Hospital's basement level. We extract her, secure any research data she's compiled, and we exfiltrate before the sterilization window closes." Wolf looked up from his radio, confusion creasing his young features. "Ma'am, what exactly are we sterilizing?" Command briefing only mentioned a chemical leak, but the quarantine perimeter spans 20 miles. That's not standard protocol for industrial accidents. Roger's jaw tightened. "Need to know, Wolf, and right now you know enough." But I'd been running Black Ops long enough to read the spaces between official words. Chemical leaks didn't require the kind of firepower I'd seen staged outside Lansford's borders. Enough ordnance to level city blocks. Chemical leaks didn't justify deploying elite extraction teams into quarantine zones. And chemical leaks definitely didn't warrant the haunted expressions I'd seen on our commanding officers' faces during the pre-mission briefing. The Black Hawk touched down in what had been Lansford Elementary's playground, its skids crushing a scatter of abandoned lunchboxes and backpacks. As we disembarked, the pilot called out over the rotor wash, 47 hours until air support is withdrawn. After that, you're ghosts. The helicopter lifted off immediately, leaving us in sudden oppressive silence broken only by distant seagull cries and something else. A low rhythmic moaning that seemed to drift from the direction of town. The ocean breeze carried scents that made my stomach clench. Rotting fish, but sweeter somehow, more organic, like meat left in summer heat for days. We moved in tactical formation toward Main Street, our boots crunching on debris that shouldn't have been there. Broken glass, torn clothing, scattered personal belongings that spoke of mass panic. Rogers took point with her usual precision. Wolf monitored communications in the middle, and I covered our 6. Standard operating procedure, except nothing about Lansford felt remotely standard. The first bodies appeared 2 blocks from the drop zone. They lay twisted in unnatural positions across the sidewalk outside Murphy's hardware store, their clothing shredded and limbs bent at impossible angles. What disturbed me most wasn't the violence evident in their deaths. I'd seen combat casualties before. It was how they'd been arranged afterward, dragged into loose piles as if something had been collecting them. "Jesus Christ," Wolf whispered, raising his rifle toward the storefront windows. "Stay focused," Rogers ordered, but her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "We're not here for body count. We moved to primary objective." But as we continued down Main Street, the evidence of catastrophic failure mounted with each block. Store windows lay shattered from the inside out. Police barricades had been scattered like toys, their concrete barriers showing deep gouges that looked suspiciously like claw marks. A patrol car sat nose down in a pothole that was definitely too large and too perfectly round to be natural, as if something massive had punched through the asphalt. Wolf's radio crackled with fragments of yesterday's emergency transmissions. "Multiple casualties at the school. They're not responding to standard crowd control measures. For God's sake, they're eating." The transmission dissolved into static. We reached the police station 3 blocks later, a squat brick building that should have been the town's last organized resistance point. Instead, we found the front doors torn completely off their hinges, lying bent and twisted in the parking lot. Dark arterial sprays painted the building's facade in patterns that suggested extreme violence had occurred here recently. Rogers signaled for interior sweep. We moved through the devastated lobby, stepping over overturned furniture and scattered paperwork. The dispatcher's desk looked like it had been attacked by wild animals. Deep scratches scored its metal surface, and the radio equipment hung in sparking ruins. The holding cells in back told an even more disturbing story. They'd been torn open from the outside, their reinforced steel doors peeled back like tin cans. Whatever had done this possessed inhuman strength, and it hadn't been interested in escape. It had been hunting what was inside. Movement. I hissed, raising my M4 toward the communications room. A figure stumbled into view between the damaged door frames, a woman wearing the torn remains of a police uniform, her badge still gleaming on her chest. She turned toward us with jerky, unnatural movements, and I got my first clear look at what Lansford had become. Her skin had taken on a sickly grey pallor, stretched tight over protruding bones. Her eyes were completely white, filmed over with something that resembled cataracts, but moved with its own liquid rhythm. Most disturbing was her jaw, which hung slack and dislocated, revealing teeth stained dark brown with substances I didn't want to identify. "Officer, are you injured?" Rogers called out, lowering her weapon slightly out of ingrained respect for local law enforcement. The infected woman's head snapped toward the sound with predatory precision. Then she screamed, not words, but a wet, guttural howl that resonated in frequencies that made my bones ache. She charged at us with impossible speed, her movements fluid despite the obvious damage to her body. Rogers' training kicked in. 3 controlled bursts center mass dropped the infected officer, but not before I noticed something that would haunt me for the rest of this mission. She hadn't bled red when the rounds hit. The expanding pool beneath her body was almost black, and it moved with its own sluggish current. What in holy hell? Wolf started. "We move," Rogers ordered. But her voice shook for the first time since I'd known her. "Hospital 6 blocks north through residential." We stick to the plan, but the plan was already disintegrating around us. As we moved through Lansford's neighborhood streets, evidence mounted that this was no chemical leak. Houses stood empty, with front doors literally ripped from their frames. The woods splintered inward, as if something had punched through from outside. Children's bicycles lay abandoned in yards beside dark stains that stretched toward storm drains like accusatory fingers. In one driveway, we found a minivan with its windows smashed outward from inside. Child-sized handprints pressed into the glass and what appeared to be dried blood. Wolf had gone quiet, his radio crackling with fragments of emergency broadcasts from the wider region. CDC containment protocols have failed completely, requesting immediate federal military support. Affected population shows 97.3% infection rate, with 100% mortality within 6 hours. "Turn that off," Rogers ordered sharply. "Captain, I think we need to hear this. Command may have updated orders. New intelligence." I said, "Shut it down, Corporal." That's when we heard the screaming. It came from the direction of the fire station 2 blocks ahead. Human voices, terrified and desperate, cut through with something else, something that sounded like tearing fabric but wet. Rogers looked at me, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. Orders said, "Proceed directly to hospital extraction." But those were American citizens calling for help, and despite everything we'd seen, we were still soldiers in the United States Army. 2 minutes, she decided we check it out, render assistance if possible, then continue to primary objective. The fire station's bay doors hung partially open, and through the gap we could see figures moving inside, some human, others not. As we approached tactically, someone shouted from within, "Please, dear God, they're everywhere. I can't hold them much longer." The voice cut off with a wet tearing sound that made my trigger finger itch. Rogers signaled for Wolf to circle around back, while she and I took the main entrance. I counted 3 heartbeats. Then we moved. Inside the station, a man in a Lansford Fire Department jacket crouched atop Engine 7, swinging a fire axe at 4 figures that moved with that same jerky, predatory motion we'd seen at the police station. These had once been people. A teenage girl in a McDonald's uniform, an elderly man in gardening clothes, a woman clutching what remained of a baby carriage. Now they moved as one organism, their grey-tinged skin pulled tight over exposed bone, their mouths hanging open to reveal those same dark-stained teeth. "Down!" I shouted and put controlled bursts into each infected. They dropped, but it took more rounds than it should have. Center mass shots barely slowed them. Only direct head shots stopped their advance immediately. The firefighter, his name tag read S. Bloom, climbed down from the engine with hands shaking so badly he could barely grip his axe. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with prematurely grey hair and eyes that had seen too much in the past 24 hours. "Thank God," he breathed, his voice from shouting. "I thought I was the last one left alive. Are you here to evacuate the survivors? Please tell me there's still time to get people out." Rogers and I exchanged glances. Our mission parameters hadn't included civilian rescue operations. "How many survivors are we talking about?" she asked. Bloom's expression crumpled. "I don't know exactly. Maybe a dozen scattered around town, hiding in basement and attics wherever these things can't reach them easily. It started at the hospital yesterday morning around 8:30. By noon, half the town was." He gestured helplessly at the bodies around us. "What can you tell us about Lansford General?" I pressed specifically about any research being conducted there. Bloom's face darkened noticeably. "There's been strange activity at that place for months. Government contractors coming and going at all hours. Unmarked trucks. Deliveries that happened under armed guard. Dr. Marina Fleury was running some kind of research program in the basement levels. Terminal patients, they said, getting experimental treatment that wasn't available anywhere else." My radio crackled to life with an encrypted transmission that made my blood run cold. "All units be advised. Containment Protocol 7 is now in effect. Biological agent has exceeded acceptable dispersal parameters. Full sterilization authorized in T-46 hours 30 minutes. Repeat. Surgical nuclear strike authorized for Lansford Ground Zero." Wool's face went white. "Sergeant Monaghan, they're talking about nuking the entire town. What about the survivors?" Rogers was studying her tactical map, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "We proceed to hospital objective. Extract Dr. Fleury and any research data that might lead to countermeasures. That's our mission." "What about the people still alive here?" Bloom demanded. "You can't just abandon American citizens. There are families with children hiding in these houses." Before Rogers could respond, my radio sparked with a new transmission. Weak, heavily distorted, coming from somewhere deeper in town. The voice was female, educated, but strained with something that sounded like physical pain. "This is Dr. Marina Fleury broadcasting from Lansford General Hospital basement level B3. I'm trapped down here, but I'm alive. I have critical information about the outbreak, including research data that Command will want recovered. I may have developed a countermeasure to the biological agent, but you need to reach me soon. The infection it's progressing differently in me than in the others. I can feel myself changing, and I don't know how much time I have left before I become like them. Please hurry. And when you find me, you need to understand what I've become, what this virus really does to human physiology." The transmission ended in bursts of static, but not before we heard something in the background that made every hair on my neck stand up. A wet, chittering sound that definitely hadn't come from a human throat. It sounded organic, alive, but wrong in ways that bypassed rational thought and went straight to primal terror. Wolf stared at his radio. "That transmission was sent 12 hours ago. It's been looping on encrypted channels ever since." Bloom grabbed my arm. 12 hours. If Dr. Fleury is still alive after 12 hours in that hospital basement, then she's not human anymore. Nothing human could survive down there with those things for 12 hours. Bloom's words hung in the air between us, like a death sentence. 12 hours in a basement swarming with those creatures. Nothing human could survive that long, which meant Dr. Marina Fleury had either found a way to barricade herself in completely, or she'd become something else entirely. Given what we'd seen on the streets of Lansford, I wasn't optimistic about the first option. "We need to move," Roger said, shouldering her rifle. 45 hours until sterilization. We get to the hospital, extract whatever's left of Dr. Fleury, and we're gone. Bloom shook his head violently. "You don't understand. The hospital isn't just where this started. It's where they wanted it to start. This wasn't some accident or containment failure. Those government contractors I told you about, they weren't delivering medical supplies. They were delivering test subjects." That stopped Rogers cold. "What are you talking about?" "My brother Danny worked maintenance at Lansford General for 15 years. Started noticing weird things about 6 months ago. Patients being brought in under heavy sedation in the middle of the night. People with terminal diagnoses who should have been in hospice care, not experimental treatment. Danny said he saw transport vehicles with federal plates, heard doctors talking about accelerated progression studies, and viral load optimization. Wolf looked sick. You're saying they were intentionally infecting terminal patients? So I'm saying they were perfecting something, Bloom replied grimly. Danny disappeared 3 weeks ago. Security told his wife he'd been transferred to another facility, but his final paycheck came with a death certificate dated 2 days before he vanished. The implications crashed over me. If this outbreak was intentional, if the military knew about it in advance, then our extraction mission wasn't about rescue at all. We were here to collect data from a successful field test. The thought made my hands shake as I checked my ammunition count. We left the fire station with Bloom as our guide, moving through Lansford's residential districts toward the hospital. The morning mist had burned off, revealing the full scope of the catastrophe in harsh sunlight. What had once been a picturesque New England town now resembled a war zone. Houses stood with their windows shattered outward, dark stains painting their white clapboard siding. In one yard, a child's swing set had been twisted into abstract metal sculpture, its chains wrapped around something that might have once been human, but was now just scattered bones and tattered clothing. The smell of decay grew stronger with each block we traveled. Residential area should have been the safest zone, Rogers muttered, scanning the empty streets. Families, neighborhood watch, people who knew each other. They should have been able to organize some kind of defense. They tried, Bloom said quietly. Danny told me the first reports came from the psychiatric ward around 8 a.m. yesterday. Patients attacking orderlies, spreading through the hospital floors. By 9 a.m, the emergency broadcast started. By 10, the infected had reached downtown. We passed a barricade that local residents had clearly tried to construct across Elm Street. Overturned cars, furniture dragged from houses, even a piano someone had somehow managed to maneuver into position. It hadn't held. The barriers lay scattered and broken, and dried blood painted everything in rust-cold streaks. How fast did it spread? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. 20 minutes from the first emergency call to complete loss of radio contact with the police station, Bloom replied. 20 minutes to lose an entire town. That was impossible. Even the fastest spreading pathogens took hours to show symptoms, days to reach full infection. Whatever had been released at Lansford General wasn't following normal biological rules. Wolf's radio crackled with another fragment of yesterday's emergency transmissions. This is Fire Station 3 requesting immediate evacuation support. Negative Station 3. All units are compromised. Dear God, they're coming through the walls. The transmission cut to silence. We reached the hospital district 20 minutes later, and I understood immediately why Bloom had called it Ground Zero. The buildings here weren't just damaged. They were transformed. Lansford General Hospital, a modern 5-story structure that should have been gleaming white concrete and glass, was now covered in something that looked organic. Dark vine-like growths spread across its exterior walls, pulsing with their own rhythm. The windows had been broken from inside, but instead of glass fragments, thick tendrils emerged from the openings like searching fingers. "What in hell is that?" Wolf whispered. Bloom's face had gone pale. That wasn't there yesterday morning. When I drove past during the evacuation, it was just a normal hospital. The parking lot told its own story of chaos. Ambulances sat overturned and burning, their medical equipment scattered across the asphalt. Cars had been abandoned mid-evacuation, their doors open and interior upholstery torn to shreds. But what disturbed me most were the patterns in the destruction. Too organized to be random panic, too purposeful to be accidental. Someone was hurting people, I realized aloud. Look at the car positions. They're not scattered randomly. They're arranged to funnel fleeing civilians toward the hospital entrance. Rogers studied the scene with professional interest. Standard crowd control tactics. Someone wanted to maximize infection rates by forcing people through choke points. A new sound reached us from inside the hospital. Not the moaning we'd heard elsewhere in town, but something mechanical, rhythmic, like industrial machinery grinding away in the basement levels. Dr. Flary's transmission came from level B3, I said, checking my tactical map. That's the sub-base research facility. We'll need to go through the main building to reach it. No, Bloom said firmly. There's a maintenance entrance on the north side, service elevators that go directly to the basement levels. Danny showed it to me once when I brought him lunch. We can bypass the main floors entirely. Rogers considered this safer approach. Less exposure to whatever's inside, but if we get trapped down there, we're already trapped. I pointed out 44 hours until this whole place becomes a crater. We circled to the hospital's north side, where a loading dock and service entrance sat partially hidden by overgrown landscaping. The metal door stood ajar, and from the opening came a sound that made my stomach clench. Wet organic noises that suggested something large moving through liquid. Bloom produced a key card from his pocket. Dye's access badge should get us to the basement levels. The service corridor beyond the door was a nightmare of biological horror. The walls were covered in the same dark growth we'd seen on the hospital exterior, but here it was thicker, more developed. It pulsed with bioluminescent veins that cast everything in sickly green light. The floor was ankle-deep in some kind of organic fluid that squelched with each step. "Stay together," Rogers ordered, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Whatever this organism is, it's not natural. Keep your breathing shallow and don't touch anything unless absolutely necessary." The service elevator was mercifully clear of the growth, its stainless steel interior gleaming under fluorescent lights that flickered with electrical damage. Bloom's keycard worked, and we descended toward basement level B3. "Sergeant Monahan," Wolf said quietly as we dropped past the main hospital floors. If this was an intentional release, if our own government was testing biological weapons on American citizens, then we follow orders and get out alive. I finished. We can worry about war crimes tribunals after we're not surrounded by infected. The elevator stopped at B3 with a soft chime that sounded absurdly normal in the circumstances. The doors opened to reveal a corridor that looked like it belonged in a high-tech research facility rather than a hospital basement. Clean white walls, polished floors, and overhead lighting that hummed with consistent power. The biological growth from upstairs hadn't reached here yet. "This way," Bloom said, consulting a facility map mounted on the wall. "Research labs are down this corridor past the containment chambers." Containment chambers. The words sent ice through my veins. This wasn't a medical research facility. It was a biological weapons laboratory, hidden beneath a small-town hospital where nobody would think to look. We moved through corridors lined with reinforced doors, each marked with biohazard symbols and clearance levels that required federal authorization. Through small windows in the doors, I caught glimpses of laboratory equipment that belonged in military facilities, not civilian hospitals, centrifuges designed for viral cultivation, isolation chambers that could contain airborne pathogens, and everywhere computer workstations displaying data that made no sense for conventional medical research. Viral load progression rates, Wolf read from one monitor. Transmission vector optimization, mortality timeline acceleration. Jesus Christ, they were designing this thing. That's when we heard the voice. It came from deeper in the facility, barely, recognizable as human, female, speaking in patterns that suggested education and intelligence, but distorted by something that made the words sound wet and wrong. "Is someone there? Please, I can hear footsteps. I've been waiting so long. The infection is it's different in me. I'm still conscious, still human enough to think, but I can feel it changing me. My spine is extending. My bones are reshaping. Please hurry before I lose what's left of my humanity." Dr. Marina Flurry, still alive after 12 hours, still capable of speech, but clearly no longer entirely human. We followed the voice deeper into the facility, past laboratories that looked like they'd been abandoned in haste. Computer terminals displayed research data that painted a horrifying picture. Project Lazarus, a joint military CDC initiative to develop adaptive biological weapons with autonomous propagation capabilities. Dr. Flary hadn't been trying to cure terminal patients. She'd been using them to perfect a virus that could think, adapt and spread with supernatural efficiency. "Here," Bloom whispered, pointing to a heavy door marked with radiation symbols. The voices coming from in there, through the doors reinforced. Window. We could see a figure crouched in the center of what appeared to be a containment cell. It had once been human, female, wearing the torn remains of a lab coat, but it was clearly in the process of becoming something else. Her spine had elongated and was visible through her skin, which had taken on that same grey pall we'd seen in the infected. But her eyes were still aware, still intelligent. "Dr. Flary," Rogers called through the intercom system. The figure's head turned toward us with movements that were too fluid, too serpentine. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "You came. I wasn't sure anyone would come. I have the data you need. Everything about Project Lazarus, about how the virus was designed to spread beyond containment. But I need something in return. I need you to take me out of here." I still have. Enough human consciousness to help you understand what's coming, but not for much longer. She stood, and I saw that her transformation had progressed far beyond what we'd witnessed in the streets above. Her limbs had elongated, her fingers extending into razor-sharp bone protrusions. Most disturbing was her spine, which now extended several feet beyond her original body, moving with its own independent rhythm. "The virus doesn't just kill," she continued, her voice taking on multiple tones simultaneously. "It optimizes, it learns. Every person it infects makes it smarter, faster, more efficient. And I was patient zero, the first successful integration of human intelligence with viral adaptability. I still remember being human, but I can also feel the collective consciousness of every infected person in Lansford. We're becoming something new, something better." Wolf raised his rifle instinctively, but Rogers held up a hand to stop him. "Dr. Fleury, we're here to extract you and your research data, but we need to know, is there a cure? Some way to stop the spread?" The thing that had been Marina Fleury tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "Stop it. Why? Would you want to stop evolution itself? But yes, there's a way to temporarily halt the spread. The virus requires a specific protein sequence to maintain its adaptive capabilities. Disrupt that sequence, and it reverts to a basic pathogen that burns out within hours." "Where is this information?" I demanded. "In here," she said, tapping her elongated skull with one bone-claw finger. "In my transformed neural tissue. You'll need to extract samples for analysis, but first you have to get me out of this containment cell." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. The intelligence behind those eyes wasn't entirely human anymore, and I was beginning to suspect that her offer of cooperation came with strings attached. But she was our only source of information about stopping this outbreak from spreading beyond Lansford. Rogers studied the containment controls. "How do we know you won't attack us the moment we open this door? Because I still remember what it was like to be human, Doctor." Fleury replied, her voice filled with genuine remorse. "And because I'm responsible for every death in this town, I thought I could cure genetic diseases, save people like myself. Instead, I created this nightmare. You're my only hope of making. Say it right before the transformation completes, and I lose the ability to feel guilt for what I've done." But as she spoke, I noticed her spine continuing to extend and more bone protrusions emerging from her shoulders and arms. Whatever she had been was disappearing rapidly, replaced by something that looked less human with each passing moment. The facility's emergency lighting suddenly shifted to red, and automated systems began announcing, "Containment breach detected, lockdown protocol initiated." Unauthorized personnel must evacuate immediately. From somewhere above us came sounds that made my hands shake. Dozens, maybe hundreds of infected pouring into the hospital, drawn by our presence or some signal we couldn't perceive. "They know we're here," Bloom whispered. "The ones upstairs, they're coming." The sound of infected flooding the hospital above us grew louder. Dozens of footsteps, inhuman howling, and the grinding of metal as they tore through doors and equipment. We had minutes, maybe less, before they reached the basement levels. "Open the containment door," I ordered Rogers. "We need those research files. And Dr. Fleury is our only source." Rogers hesitated, her finger hovering over the release controls. "Sergeant Monaghan, look at her. She's barely human anymore. The moment we open that door—" "I won't hurt you," Dr. Flare interrupted, pressing her transformed face against the reinforced window. Her features had continued changing, even in the few minutes we'd been talking. Her jaw had elongated, her skin stretched taut over protruding bone structures. "I still have enough consciousness to control the viral impulses. But you need to hurry. I can feel my human memories fading." Bloom grabbed my arm. "This is insane. That thing isn't Dr. Marina Fleury anymore. It's wearing her memories like a disguise, but we were out of options. The facility's emergency systems continued blaring warnings about containment breaches, and through the ceiling, I could hear infected tearing apart the floors above us. Whatever Dr. Fleury had become, she was still our best chance of understanding how to stop Project Perseus from spreading beyond Lansford. Rogers activated the containment release, and the heavy door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Dr. Fleury stepped out slowly, her movements unnaturally fluid. Up close, her transformation was even more disturbing than it had appeared through the window. Her spine had extended into a segmented tail that moved independently, tasting the air with sensory organs that definitely hadn't been human. Her fingers had become razor-sharp bone protrusions, and her eyes had developed additional pupils that tracked movement with predatory precision. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made my teeth ache. The isolation was difficult. The virus doesn't just change your body, it changes how you perceive reality. I can sense every infected person in Lansford now. Feel their pain, their hunger, their confusion as they lose their humanity. Wolf kept his rifle trained on her, but she seemed genuinely focused on helping us rather than attacking. She moved to one of the laboratory terminals and began accessing files with movements too fast for human hands. "Project Perseus was my life's work," she explained while typing. "I've carried the Huntington's gene since I was 25, watched it kill my father, my grandmother. I was determined to find a cure before it killed me, too. When the anonymous funding came through, unlimited resources, no oversight committees, no ethical review boards, I thought it was a miracle." "Who provided the funding?" I asked, though part of me suspected we wouldn't like the answer. I never knew their identity. Communications came through encrypted channels, payments from shell corporations. But they wanted results-fast human trials within 6 months, regardless of safety protocols. I should have refused, should have insisted on proper testing phases. Instead, I convinced myself that terminal patients had nothing to lose. The sound from above grew more intense. Metal tearing, concrete cracking, and underneath it all, that wet, chittering noise we'd heard in Dr. Flair's original transmission. The infected weren't just randomly searching the hospital. They were being directed, coordinated by some kind of collective intelligence. "They're coming for me," Dr. Fleury said without looking up from the terminal. "The virus creates a hive mind among the infected. They can sense when one of their own is in distress, and my human consciousness is distressing to them. They want to complete my transformation, eliminate the part of me that still feels guilt." She finished downloading the research data onto a portable drive and handed it to me. "Everything about Project Perseus is on there? The genetic sequences, the enzyme inhibitors, the theoretical countermeasures. But Sergeant Monahan, you need to understand. Stopping the virus isn't just about chemistry. It's about biology beyond human comprehension." "What do you mean?" Rogers demanded. Dr. Flair's expression became pained, her multiple pupils dilating with what looked like fear. "The virus doesn't just rewrite DNA. It optimizes biological systems in ways that shouldn't be possible. The infected aren't dying and reanimating. They're being upgraded. Enhanced strength, accelerated healing, collective consciousness, sensory capabilities beyond human limits. I created something that makes humanity obsolete." A thunderous crash echoed through the facility as something massive punched through the ceiling above us. Debris rained down, and through the hole came a creature that had once been human, but was now something else entirely. It had grown to nearly 8 FT tall, its limbs elongated and muscular, its skull expanded to accommodate what appeared to be a much larger brain. But most disturbing were its eyes. Dozens of them arranged across its face and neck, all tracking our movements with intelligent malice. "Alpha variant," Dr. Flair whispered. "The virus sometimes creates command nodes, infected who retain higher intelligence and can direct the others. This one was probably a patient with exceptional neural architecture before infection." The alpha creature spoke, its voice a chorus of different tones. "Marina Fleury, you resist completion. You cling to inferior human consciousness. We have come to correct this error." More infected poured through the hole, dozens of them moving with coordinated precision rather than the shambling chaos we'd seen in the streets. These weren't mindless zombies. They were soldiers in an army that was learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. "Get behind me," Dr. Flair said, positioning herself between us and the swarm. I still have enough control to her words cut off, as her transformation suddenly accelerated. Her spine erupted outward, extending into multiple segmented appendages that moved with their own intelligence. Her bone protrusions grew larger and sharper, and her skin began shedding in sheets to reveal something underneath that wasn't human at all. "No," she screamed. But her voice was changing, taking on the same chorus effect as the alpha creature. "I'm losing control. The human part of me is I can't." She lunged at the nearest infected within human speed, her bone claws tearing through their transformed bodies like paper. But instead of bleeding, they began regenerating almost immediately, their wounds closing as we watched the research data. I shouted to Wolf, "Get it to the surface." But we were surrounded. More infected poured through the ceiling hole, and others began breaking through the facility's reinforced doors. These weren't the confused, disoriented creatures we'd encountered on the streets. They moved with purpose, intelligence, coordinated strategy. Rogers opened fire with controlled bursts, but our ammunition was limited, and the infected were adapting to our tactics in real time. When we aimed for their heads, they began protecting their skulls with armored bone growths. When we tried to retreat, they anticipated our movements and cut off escape routes. Dr. Flary, or the thing she was becoming, fought with terrifying efficiency, but I could see her losing the battle for her own consciousness. Her attacks were becoming more savage, less controlled, and her voice was losing all trace of human language. "The enzyme inhibitor," she managed to scream between attacks. "Sample from my neural tissue. It's the only way to synthesize a countermeasure." That's when I understood what Command really wanted. Not Dr. Flary alive, not just her research data, but biological samples from patient 0, the one infected who had retained enough human consciousness to potentially provide a cure. They'd sent us to collect pieces of her transformed anatomy, knowing we might not survive the extraction. The alpha creature had cornered Bloom against one of the laboratory walls. Its multiple eyes studied him with scientific curiosity before speaking. "Human, your genetic pattern shows potential for optimization. You will become one of us. Resistance is counterproductive to species advancement." "Like hell," Bloom snarled, swinging his fire axe at the creature's head. The axe connected, but barely penetrated the alpha's hardened skull. Instead of falling, the creature grabbed Bloom by the throat and began some kind of biological conversion process. I watched in horror as dark veins spread from its touch across Bloom's neck and face. "Scott!" I shouted, putting 3 rounds into the alpha's torso. It released Bloom and turned toward me with what might have been amusement. Projectile weapons are inefficient against optimized biological systems, human soldier. We adapt faster than you can innovate. But Dr. Flary, fighting her own transformation with desperate determination, managed one last act of human conscience. She drove her bone claws directly into her own skull, penetrating deep into her transformed brain tissue. "Now," she screamed with her final human words. "Take the sample now before I lose myself completely." Rogers didn't hesitate. She drew her combat knife and began extracting neural tissue from Dr. Flare's self-inflicted wound. Working with battlefield surgeon precision while infected swarmed around us, the facility's countdown system suddenly activated. Emergency sterilization in 30 minutes. All personnel must evacuate immediately. 30 minutes until the nuclear strike, but we were trapped in a basement, swarming with evolved infected, and our guide to the surface was dying from voluntary brain surgery. "Elevator!" Wolf shouted, laying down covering fire as we retreated toward the service corridor. We can still reach the surface, but the alpha creature was learning, adapting, becoming smarter with each exchange. It had analyzed our weapons, our tactics, our psychology. As we reached the elevator, it spoke with something that sounded almost like respect. "You fight well for an inferior species? When the optimization spreads beyond this containment zone, we will remember your tactical innovations." The elevator doors began closing, just as infected reached us. I caught a final glimpse of Dr. Flare, no longer human, no longer herself, but still fighting against the creatures she had accidentally created. Her scientific mind, even transformed beyond recognition, was still trying to protect the people her research had endangered. We rode the elevator up through floors filled with infected, the facility's emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Rogers clutched the neural tissue sample and research data, while Wolf monitored radio communications, for any sign of extraction support. 25 minutes until sterilization, the facility announced. Biological containment protocols have failed. Full site cleansing authorized. The elevator opened onto the hospital's main floor, where we found ourselves in a nightmare landscape of biological horror. The infected had been busy during our time in the basement. The building's interior was now covered in the same organic growth we'd seen outside, pulsing with bioluminescent veins that suggested some kind of distributed nervous system. But worse than the physical transformation was the intelligence behind it. This wasn't random infection. It was planned cultivation. The infected were farming the hospital, turning it into some kind of breeding facility for their enhanced biology. They're not just surviving, I realized aloud. They're building something. A nest, a command center, a launching point for spreading beyond Lansford. We fought our way through corridors that shifted and changed around us, the organic growth responding to our presence like a living organism. The infected here moved with even more coordination than those in the basement, suggesting that proximity to the growth enhanced their collective intelligence. Outside, we could hear helicopters approaching. Not evacuation aircraft, but attack gunships preparing for the final sterilization strike. We had minutes to reach the extraction point before everything in a 20-meter radius became radioactive glass. There, Bloom pointed toward the hospital's loading dock, where we'd originally entered. But he was pale, swaying on his feet, the dark veins from the Alpha's touch spreading across his skin. "Scott, you're infected," Rogers said grimly. "I know," he replied quietly, "but I'm still me for now. I can get you to the extraction point before I change." We ran through the hospital's transformed corridors, while the building itself seemed to pursue us. Organic tendrils reaching out from walls and ceiling. Behind us, infected poured in waves, but they were no longer focused on capturing us. They were trying to escape the coming nuclear fire. The loading dock doors stood open, revealing Lansford streets bathed in the red glow of approaching dawn. In the distance, I could see helicopters circling, waiting for survivors to reach the extraction zone before they turned the entire area into a crater. But as we emerged from the hospital, I realized the true scope of what Dr. Fleury had accidentally unleashed. The organic growth wasn't limited to the hospital. It had spread throughout the town, connecting every building in a vast neural network. The infected weren't just individual creatures anymore. They were nodes in a distributed intelligence that was learning, growing, preparing to spread beyond Lansford's quarantine zone. 15 minutes until sterilization. My radio crackled. All extraction teams report to designated safe zones immediately. We ran through streets that pulsed with alien intelligence, past infected, who watched our retreat with what looked like strategic calculation, rather than mindless hunger. They weren't trying to stop us anymore. They were studying us, learning from our escape tactics for future encounters. At the town's edge, military vehicles waited behind the quarantine perimeter. As we reached the extraction zone, medics immediately began examining us for signs of infection. Rogers handed over the neural tissue sample and research data, while Wolf transmitted our final report. "Mission accomplished," she said grimly. "Doctor from Marina Fleury extracted, research data secured," but Bloom collapsed before reaching the medical station, the infection spreading visibly through his circulatory system. As medics prepared to quarantine him, he grabbed my arm with hands that were already beginning to change. "It's not over," he whispered, his voice taking on harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. "The growth network extends beyond the town boundaries, through the storm drains, the groundwater system. Whatever that nuclear strike destroys on the surface, it won't reach the root system underground." The countdown reached 0. The horizon behind us erupted in nuclear fire, turning Lansford into a pillar of flame and radioactive steam. But even as the town disappeared in atomic cleansing, I could feel something in the ground beneath our feet, a pulsing rhythmic vibration that suggested the network of infected biology extended far beyond the blast radius. My radio crackled with reports from other regions. Possible outbreak detected in Portland. Unusual pathogen identified in Boston water supply. CDC requesting immediate containment support for multiple sites along the eastern seaboard. As military trucks carried us away from the radioactive crater that had been Lansford, I stared at the neural tissue sample Rogers had risked everything to obtain. Dr. Marina Flair's final gift to humanity, the potential cure for the nightmare she'd accidentally created. But I couldn't shake Bloom's final words, or the feeling that our extraction mission had been successful in ways Command hadn't anticipated. We'd obtained the research data and biological samples they wanted. But in doing so, we'd also helped the infected learn about human military tactics, capabilities, and psychology. Project Perseus wasn't contained in Lansford's ashes. It was spreading, adapting, evolving with every encounter. And somewhere in a laboratory, anonymous benefactors who had funded Dr. Flair's research were probably already analyzing our mission reports, planning their next move in a game where humanity itself was the stakes. The war for human survival had just begun, and I wasn't sure we were equipped to win it.